300 cadets filled the amphitheater like a living wall of scales, chitin, and muscle. They came from 12 different species across the coalition, and every single one of them believed they were dangerous. They sat up straight. They took notes with sharp focus. They wanted to become the deadliest soldiers the galaxy had ever produced. Nobody looked at the last row, that if they had, they would have seen a small human girl sitting with her knees pulled up to her chest, a data pad balanced on her lap, and her eyes fixed on the instructor below. She wore no uniform. She carried no rank. Her name tag simply read, A. Briggs, Civilian Consultant. Most cadets had walked past her for weeks without realizing she existed. Her name was Annie Briggs. She was 19 years old. She weighed 53 kilograms. And she was the most dangerous person in the room, though not a single soul in that amphitheater knew it yet. Down at the front, Instructor Domel paced back and forth like a caged predator. He was Garrote, 2.5 meters of gray-green scales, armored plates along his spine, and a voice like gravel dragged through a steel pipe. He had trained soldiers for 40 years. He had fought in 3 wars. He had buried more students than he cared to count, and he made sure the ones who survived were worth the oxygen they breathed. Today's lesson was advanced survival tactics. Domel projected a holographic diagram of a standard shelter hierarchy and began walking the cadets through it. Water sourcing, caloric rationing formulas, threat assessment grids. Everything was clean, organized, and efficient. In the 4th row, a young Sorvathi cadet named Pylon leaned over to his roommate. Pylon was tall, even by Sorvathi standards, with 4 long arms and a narrow head covered in segmented plates. He was top of his class in hand-to-hand combat and never let anyone forget it. You know, they brought a human in as a consultant, he whispered, tilting his head toward the back row. His roommate glanced up and shrugged. For what? Survival module, apparently. Pylon clicked his mandibles in amusement. Humans. Soft skin. Weak bones. They need blankets when it gets cold. What could one of them possibly teach us? A few nearby cadets laughed quietly. Domel did not correct them. He had thought the same thing when he first heard the news. That evening, after the cadets had filed out and the amphitheater sat empty, Commander Risha walked into Domel's office without knocking. She was Delvani, shorter than Domel by a full meter, with translucent blue-gray skin that showed the faint pulse of veins beneath. Her species had evolved in deep oceans, and they moved through air the way most creatures move through water, slow, deliberate, and impossible to rush. Domel looked up from his desk. Commander, the board approved it, Risha said. She placed a thin data chip on his desk. Starting next cycle, Annie Briggs will co-teach the survival module. Domel stared at her. Then he laughed. It was not a kind laugh. A child, he said. You want me to hand my classroom to a human child? She is 19. She's a civilian with no training, no rank, and no combat experience. My cadets will eat her alive. Risha did not smile. She did not argue. She simply tapped the data chip with one long finger and pushed it closer to him. That is the classified file on Colony Ardeen 6, she said. Read it. All of it. Then tell me what you think. I already know about Ardeen 6. Failed colony. Atmospheric failure. Sad story. You know the summary. You do not know what happened inside. Risha turned toward the door. Read the file, Domel. Read what that child did. And then you will understand why the board did not ask for your opinion. She left. Domel sat alone in his office for a long time. The data chip sat on his desk like a small, quiet bomb. He had read hundreds of classified files in his career. Battle reports. Interrogation transcripts. War crime investigations. None of them had ever been handed to him with that look in someone's eyes that he picked up the chip and inserted it into his terminal. The file opened. It was long. It contained medical records, environmental data, rescue team reports, and psychological evaluations. He scrolled through it slowly, then less slowly. Then he stopped scrolling altogether and just read. Colony Ardeen 6. Population 400. Atmosphere processors failed on day 90. Toxic air. Supply lines cut. Emergency beacon launched, but flagged as low priority. No rescue for 214 days. 392 colonists died. 0.8 survived. The oldest survivor was 41. The youngest was 4. The person who kept them alive was 12. Domel read the rescue team's report. He read it twice. He read the section about the sealed water treatment room, the improvised air scrubber, the fungus cultures grown from waste, the rationing system so precise it would have impressed his best logistics officers. He read about the locked door and the pipe wrench. He read about a 12-year-old girl who stood in front of that door and refused to die for 7 months straight. He closed the file. He sat back in his chair. The office was dark now. He had not noticed the lights dimming that he did not sleep that night. The amphitheater felt different the next morning. Not because anything had changed in the room itself. The lights were the same. The seats were the same. The 300 cadets filed in with the same noise and energy they always carried. But Instructor Domel was already seated in the back row when they arrived, and that had never happened before. He said nothing. He sat with his massive arms folded across his chest, and his yellow eyes locked on the small figure standing at the front of the room. Annie Briggs looked like she had been placed there by accident. She stood behind the podium, but did not touch it. Her hands hung at her sides. Her hair was pulled back in a loose tie. She wore the same plain gray clothes she always wore. No uniform, no rank pins, nothing to suggest she belonged in a military academy at all. The cadets settled into their seats. A few pointed at her. A few whispered. Hylan, sitting in his usual fourth-row spot, leaned back and crossed two of his forearms. Annie looked out at the room. 300 faces looked back. Most of them were twice her size. Some had claws. Some had armored skin. Some had fought in real battles before they were old enough to attend the academy. She opened her mouth to speak, and her voice barely made it past the second row. "I'm not a soldier," she said. Someone in the middle rows coughed. A few cadets exchanged looks. Annie tried again, a little louder this time. "I'm not a soldier. I have never held a weapon designed to kill. I have no combat training. I have no rank. Most of you could break me in half without trying." Silence now. Not respectful silence. Confused silence. Why was this person talking to them? Annie looked down at the floor for a moment. Then she looked back up. "How many of you have ever been truly hungry?" she asked. Nobody answered. Not missed a meal hungry. Not training exercise hungry. I mean hungry in a way where your body starts eating itself, where your vision goes dark at the edges and you cannot remember what day it is, where you look at things that are not food and your brain starts telling you to eat them anyway. The room was very still now. "I have," Annie said. "I was 12. She told them about Colony Ardeen 6. She did not raise her voice. She did not add drama or pause for effect. She spoke the way someone reads a grocery list, flat and factual, and plain. 400 people landed on Ardeen, 6 with enough supplies for 2 years and a promise that resupply ships would come every 6 months. The planet was marginal but livable. The atmosphere processors were supposed to handle the toxic elements in the air and convert them into something breathable. For 90 days, everything worked fine. On day 91, the primary processor failed. The backup lasted 11 more days. By day 102, the air outside the colony's sealed habitation modules was poison. The colony's leadership sent an emergency beacon. Coalition systems received it, flagged it, and classified it as low priority because Ardeen 6 was in a remote sector and the colony was small. The bureaucratic system estimated a response window of 30 to 45 days, and O1 came for 214 days. Annie told them what happened inside the colony once the air turned bad. She told them how the sealed modules kept people alive at first, but the food supply was designed for a colony that could farm. Without outside air circulation, there was no farming. Rationing began on day 105. Fights broke out on day 108. The colony's 2 doctors ran out of critical medicine by day 114. "My parents died on day 9 of the crisis," Annie said. "Day 100 overall. My father went first. Respiratory failure. My mother tried to make it to the medical bay, but the corridors between modules were already filled with toxic air. She did not make it." She said this the same way she had said everything else. "No tears. No trembling. Just facts. My brother Ren was 4 years old. He asked me when Mom was coming back. I told him she had to go help some people and that I would take care of him until she got home. Pylon had stopped leaning back in his chair. He was sitting forward now, all four hands flat on the desk in front of him. I did not know how to take care of a 4-year-old, Annie continued. I did not know how to take care of myself. I was 12. I liked drawing pictures and reading adventure stories. I had never cooked a meal by myself. I had never fixed anything more complicated than a zipper. She paused, not for drama, just to breathe. But I learned, because the only other option was to watch my little brother die. And I decided that was not going to happen. She told him about the first night alone, how she locked the door to their family quarters and pushed furniture against it because she could hear people screaming in the corridors, how she held Ren in her lap and told him stories until he fell asleep, how she sat awake in the dark and made a decision that she would keep him alive no matter what it cost her. That was day one for me, she said. I had 213 more to go. The session ended. Annie picked up her datapad and walked out through the side door without waiting for questions. Nobody laughed. Nobody whispered. Nobody moved for a long time. In the back row, Domel uncrossed his arms. He looked down at the cadets below him. He had spent 40 years teaching these species how to fight, how to shoot, how to survive. He had never once taught them what it looked like when survival was not a choice, but a promise made to a 4-year-old brother in the dark. He was starting to understand why Risha had not asked for his opinion. The lectures continued over the next several days, and something strange began to happen inside the amphitheater. Cadets started arriving early. Not 5 minutes early, 20 minutes early. They sat in silence and waited for the small human girl to walk to the front of the room and begin talking. Annie never seemed to notice. She came in through the side door, set her datapad on the podium, and picked up exactly where she had left off the day before. No greetings, no warm-up, just the next piece of the story, told in that same quiet, steady voice that on the third day, she talked about water. The colony's water recycling system was still partially functional, but it was designed to serve 400 people. With sections of the colony sealed off due to toxic air, most of the system was inaccessible. The water that reached Annie's section was rationed down to half a liter per person per day, then a quarter. Then it stopped entirely on day 120. Ren was thirsty all the time, Annie said. He cried about it. He was 4. He did not understand why I could not just give him water. I told him I was working on it. She described what she did next. And this was the part where the cadets stopped taking normal notes and started drawing diagrams. Annie had found a maintenance manual in the bag of a dead technician 3 corridors away. She had crawled through a half-collapsed ventilation shaft to reach the body because the main corridors were filled with toxic air. She held her breath for as long as she could, grabbed the bag, and crawled back. She was 12. The shaft was barely wide enough for her shoulders. The manual was written for adult engineers. Half the words meant nothing to her, but it had diagrams, and Annie could follow diagrams. She figured out that the temperature difference between the inner walls and outer walls of the colony module created condensation. Water was collecting between the wall panels every night and evaporating every morning. It was not much, but it was water. She pulled wall panels off with a prying tool she made from a broken chair leg. She lined the gaps with plastic sheeting from supply containers and created channels that funneled the condensation into bottles. On a good night, she collected almost a full liter. It tasted like metal and plastic, she said. Ren said it was yucky. I told him it was special space water. He believed me. A Garati cadet in the 6th row made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something else entirely. On the 4th day, Annie talked about air. The sealed room she had chosen, a small section of the water treatment facility, had limited oxygen. The colony's emergency air supply was a set of compressed tanks, but those ran out on day 130. After that, the air in the room would slowly become unbreathable. Annie did not know what an air scrubber was. She did not know the chemistry of carbon dioxide removal. But the maintenance manual had a section on emergency ventilation, and buried in that section was a diagram of a chemical scrubbing unit that used lithium hydroxide canisters to filter CO2. She did not have lithium hydroxide, but she read the section over and over until she understood the basic idea. Air goes in dirty, passes through something that grabs the bad parts, and comes out cleaner. she built her own version. She took ventilation fans from the ceiling, wired them to a backup battery pack, and created an airflow loop through containers filled with layers of charcoal she made by burning fabric and dried waste. It was not perfect. The air still tasted wrong. But the oxygen levels held. She was 12, and she built an air purification system from garbage. Pylon approached her after that session. He stood in front of her awkwardly, all four arms hanging at his sides like he did not know what to do with them. "The fungus cultures," he said. "You mentioned growing food from waste. How did you keep the cultures alive when the temperature dropped at night?" Annie looked up at him. She was a full meter shorter than him. "I buried the containers in insulation stripped from the wall panels. Fungus does not need light. It just needs warmth and moisture. I kept the moisture steady by dripping condensation water into the containers through cloth wicks." Pylon nodded slowly. "That is not in any of our survival manuals." "I know," Annie said. "I did not have your survival manuals. I had a maintenance book and a scared little brother." Pylon walked away without his usual swagger. His roommate asked him what was wrong. Pylon did not answer. That night, Domel sat in his office and did something he had not done in 20 years of teaching. He pulled up the Academy's official survival curriculum, placed it side by side with his recordings of Annie's lectures, and began comparing them line by line. The Academy taught water procurement through standard purification tablets and portable filtration units. Annie had created a passive collection system from wall panels and plastic sheeting that required no power and no supplies. The Academy taught air management through pressurized emergency reserves and standard issue scrubbers. Annie had built a functional air filtration loop from ceiling fans and burned fabric. The Academy taught food sourcing through emergency rations and field foraging guides. Annie had grown a sustainable food source in a sealed room using human waste and condensation. He went through every category: shelter, water, air, food, temperature regulation, waste management. In 6 out of 8 categories, a 12-year-old girl with no training had matched or beaten the military standard. Domel closed his terminal and sat in the dark for a long time. Then he opened a new file and began rewriting his curriculum. Annie did not come to the amphitheater on the 7th day. The cadets sat in their seats and waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. 300 soldiers from a dozen species sat in perfect silence, staring at an empty podium, and not one of them complained. Not one of them left. Domel watched from the back row. He knew what today's lecture was supposed to cover. He had read the file. He understood why she might not come to the 25-minute mark. The side door opened. Annie walked in slowly. She looked smaller than usual, which should not have been possible because she was already the smallest person in the building. She placed her data pad on the podium and stood there for a long moment without speaking. "Today is the hard part," she said. Nobody moved. "Days 100 through 180. I have only talked about this twice. Once to the rescue team psychologist. Once to Commander Risha. I'm going to talk about it one more time, and then I'm never going to talk about it again." She gripped the edges of the podium with both hands. Her knuckles went white. "By day 100, I had my system working. The sealed room, the water collection, the air scrubber, the fungus farm. Ren and I were alive. Thin and tired and scared, but alive. And then the others found us." She explained that the colony had fractured into small groups of survivors scattered across different modules. Most of them were adults. Most of them were running out of everything. Somehow, word spread that there was a sealed room in the water treatment section that had clean air, water, and food. "They came to my door," Annie said. The first group was 3 people, a woman and 2 men. They knocked. They asked to come in. I talked to them through the door for almost an hour before I opened it. She took them in. She recalculated her rationing system to cover 5 people instead of 2. It meant less food for everyone, but the math still worked if she cut her own portion in half. Then more came. A man and his daughter. Then another woman, alone. I let them all in. 8 people total, including me and Ren. That was the maximum. I had calculated exactly how much air, water, and food the room could support. 8 was the limit. If I took one more person, someone would die. Her voice was still flat, still steady, but her hands had not let go of the podium. On day 138, a group of 6 adults came to the door. They were desperate. They were starving. They begged me to let them in. She looked at the floor. I said no. The amphitheater was so quiet that the hum of the ventilation system sounded like a roar. I was 12 years old, and I told 6 starving adults that I could not help them, because if I did, the people already inside would die. One of them screamed at me. One of them cried. One of them just walked away without saying anything. She paused. Her breathing was controlled, deliberate, like she was counting each breath. I do not know what happened to them. I never found out. Pylan's hands were trembling on his desk. His roommate noticed, but said nothing. Annie continued. She described how the sealed room became its own small world. 8 people in a space designed for equipment, not living. They slept in shifts. They ate in measured portions. Every drop of water was tracked. Every breath was counted. I was the one who ran it, she said. Not because I was the smartest or the strongest. Because I built it. Because I understood the systems. Because I was the only one who knew exactly how much we could afford to use each day. The adults listened to me because they had no choice. A 12-year-old girl was the reason they were alive, and they knew it. Then she told them about day 156. A man came to the door at night. He did not knock. He did not ask. He tried to break through. Annie stopped. She stood very still. The entire amphitheater held its breath. I had reinforced the door with metal bracing from the equipment racks. He could not get through it, but he tried for almost 2 hours. He hit it with something heavy, over and over. Ren woke up and started crying. The others were terrified. They looked at me like I was supposed to know what to do. She swallowed hard. I picked up the pipe wrench I kept beside the door. I stood there and I waited. And I decided that if he got through, I would stop him. I was 12. He was a grown man. But Ren was behind me, and I was not going to move. She did not say what happened next. She only said, very quietly, he did not get in. The silence that followed was not the silence of an empty room. It was the silence of 300 beings understanding something they had never understood before. That the Garrote cadet in the second row wiped his eyes with the back of a scaled hand. He did it quickly, hoping nobody saw. Several people saw. Annie let go of the podium. She stepped back. She looked out at the room, full of trained killers and warriors and elite soldiers, and she said the words that would be carved into the Academy's walls 3 years later. I am not telling you this so you feel sorry for me. I am telling you this because every one of you will one day face a moment where your training is not enough, where your weapons are gone, where your backup is not coming. And in that moment, the only thing that will save you is the decision to keep going. Not because you are brave, not because you are strong, but because someone behind you needs you to. She picked up her data pad and walked out. Nobody followed. Nobody spoke. Domel sat in the back row with his jaw locked tight, and for the first time in 40 years of military service, he did not trust himself to stand. For the first time since Annie began teaching, Commander Risha was present in the amphitheater. She stood near the side entrance with her hands folded behind her back, her translucent skin showing the slow, calm pulse of blue veins beneath. She did not sit down. She watched the room the way a surgeon watches a patient on the table, carefully and with full attention. Annie was already at the podium when the cadets arrived. That was unusual. She always came in after them, slipping through the side door like she was trying not to be noticed. But today she was there first, standing still, her datapad unopened in front of her. The cadets took their seats quickly. No whispering, no shuffling. 300 soldiers settled in a silence like water filling a bowl. Annie looked at them. Something in her face was different today. Not harder, not softer, just tired. The kind of tired that lives behind the eyes and never quite goes away. Day 214, she said. She told them what the last weeks were like. The food was nearly gone. The fungus cultures had thinned because the nutrient base was running low. Water collection had dropped because the temperature differential between the walls was shrinking as the colony's power system slowly failed. The air scrubber was working, but barely. She had to replace the charcoal filters every 2 days instead of every 5. Ren had stopped asking when Mom was coming back, she said. He stopped asking about a lot of things. He was quiet most of the time. He just sat next to me and held onto my sleeve. He was almost 5 by then. She described the other survivors in the room. The woman who sang softly to herself when she thought no one was listening. The man who had been an engineer before the crisis and helped Annie maintain the air scrubber when it started failing. The little girl whose father carried her everywhere because she had stopped walking from weakness. We did not talk about rescue anymore, Annie said. We had stopped expecting it around day 150. We just focused on the next day. Get water. Check the air. Feed everyone. Sleep. Do it again. Then she told them about the morning of day 214. I heard a sound. It was different from anything I had heard in months. It was not the ventilation fans. It was not the walls settling. It was coming from outside the colony. From above. A ship, a coalition patrol vessel called the Dawnkeeper, had been passing through the sector on an unrelated survey mission. A junior communications officer had picked up an old, repeating distress signal and flagged it out of curiosity. The signal was from the emergency beacon Annie's colony had launched over 7 months ago. The ship diverted to investigate. They expected to find a dead colony. Standard recovery protocol. Document the site. Collect remains. File a report. They sent a shuttle down with a 6-person recovery team. They cut through the outer airlock and entered the main corridor, Annie said. They found bodies. A lot of bodies. They assumed everyone was dead. Their team leader filed an initial report saying the colony was a total loss. She paused. Then one of them noticed the sealed door. The recovery team found a reinforced door in the water treatment section that had been welded, braced, and barricaded from the inside. The air around it was toxic, but their atmospheric sensors picked up a pocket of breathable air behind it. They knocked. Annie told the cadets what happened next, and for the first time in all her lectures, her voice cracked. I heard the knock, and I picked up my pipe wrench. I walked to the door, and I said, through the metal, identify yourselves or leave. A 12-year-old girl, 7 months alone, starving and exhausted. And her first response to a knock on the door was to grab a weapon and demand identification. The team leader identified himself. He gave his name, rank, and ship. Annie asked him to confirm the ship's registration number. He did. She asked him to slide his identification badge under the door. He did. She checked it. Then she opened the door. The team leader told me later that when the door opened, he thought he was looking at a ghost. He said I was so thin he could see my ribs through my shirt. He said I was holding a pipe wrench that was almost as long as my arm. And he said the first thing I told him was, there are 7 people behind me, including a child. They need water and medical attention. I need you to confirm that your ship has enough supplies before I let you take them. Annie stopped. She stood very still at the podium. Commander Risha stepped forward. She faced the cadets and spoke in her low, measured voice. I'm going to read you one paragraph from the rescue team's official report. She opened a file on her own datapad. The survivor, a minor aged 12, had constructed and maintained a self-sustaining habitat using no advanced tools, no military training, and no outside assistance. Her resource management systems exceeded standard coalition survival protocols in 6 of 8 categories. She maintained the lives of 7 additional survivors, including a 4-year-old child, for a period of 214 days. This surpasses the projected maximum survival window for the conditions by 160 days. We recommend immediate and comprehensive study of her methods. Risha lowered the datapad. Annie Briggs' survival techniques have been formally integrated into this academy's curriculum, not as a supplement, not as an elective module, as the primary survival doctrine for all coalition forces. She looked at Annie, a 12-year-old human girl with no training, no weapons, and no help, built something that outperformed every survival system this galaxy has ever designed. And she did it to keep her little brother alive. Annie sat down in the nearest chair and pressed her hands together in her lap. She did not look up. I in the 4th row, Pylon was crying. He did not try to hide it. Weeks passed. The survival module ended. The amphitheater returned to its normal rhythm of tactical lessons, weapons training reviews, and combat theory. Instructor Domel stood at the front again, pacing and growling at cadets who answered too slowly. Everything looked the way it had before. But nothing was the same. The cadets carried themselves differently. They did not joke about humans anymore. Not because someone had ordered them to stop. Because the joke was no longer funny. It was like trying to laugh at the ocean after you had almost drowned in it. Pylon changed the most. He still trained harder than anyone. He still scored highest in hand-to-hand combat. But the arrogance was gone. Something had replaced it, something quieter and heavier and more useful. His combat instructors noticed that he had started helping weaker cadets in his squad instead of mocking them. When they asked him why, he said, "Because someone behind me might need me too." He did not explain further. He did not need to dot on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the last lecture. Pylon walked into the amphitheater during a free period. He expected it to be empty. It was not. Annie sat in the very last row, her knees pulled up, her data pad on her lap, exactly the way she had been sitting the first day he ever noticed her. She was reading something. She did not look up when he came in. Pylon climbed the steps slowly. His 4 long legs carried him up with the quiet precision of someone trying not to disturb a sleeping animal. He reached the last row and sat down in the seat beside her. He did not speak for a while. She did not seem to mind. Finally, he said, "My people have a word. Pinda." Annie looked at him. It does not translate perfectly. The closest meaning is the weight that shapes the spine. He folded his upper arms across his chest. His lower arms rested on his knees. It is the highest thing a Sorvathi can say about someone. It means that something terrible bent you, broke you, crushed you down. And instead of collapsing, you grew around it. You became the shape that could carry it. And because you carry it, everyone near you stand a little straighter. Annie was quiet for a long time. She looked at her data pad, then back at Pylon. "That is a good word," she said. "You carry thine array." Pylon said, "I wanted you to know that I see it." Annie smiled. It was small and quick and gone almost before it arrived, like sunlight through a closing door. "Thank you, Pylon." He nodded once and stood up. He walked back down the steps without looking back, and when he reached the bottom, he paused. He wanted to say something else. Something about how sorry he was for what he had whispered about humans in the 4th row all those weeks ago. Something about how he had been raised to believe that strength meant armor and claws and size, and how a girl half his height had taken that belief apart without raising her voice. But he did not say any of it. Some things do not need words. He walked out. 20 minutes later, the amphitheater door opened again. Domel entered. He was not in his instructor uniform. He wore his formal military dress, the one reserved for ceremonies, tribunals, and occasions of highest honor. The armored plates along his spine gleamed under the lights. He walked up the steps. Each footfall was heavy and deliberate. Annie watched him approach with a confused expression. Domel stopped directly in front of her. He straightened to his full height, 2.5 meters of Garrote warrior, scarred and decorated and legendary. Then he saluted that IT was a full military salute. Both arms crossed over the chest, head lowered, eyes closed. In Garrote culture, this gesture was reserved for commanding officers who had proven themselves in blood. Domel had given it fewer than 10 times in his entire career. He had never given it to a civilian. He had certainly never given it to a human. "I have trained 10,000 soldiers," he said, his gravel voice low and steady. "You're not a soldier. You are something my soldiers need to become." Annie stared at him. For a moment, the mask she wore, that careful, quiet blankness that kept everything locked inside, shifted. Just for a second. Her eyes went bright and her lips pressed together hard, and she looked like a 19-year-old girl who had once been a 12-year-old girl who had carried an entire world on her back and never once been thanked for it. "Thank you, sir," she said softly. Domel lowered his arms. He did not smile. Garrote did not smile. But he held her gaze for a long moment, and something passed between them that did not require expression or translation. He turned and walked out of the amphitheater. Annie sat alone in the back row for a long time after that. She looked at the empty seats stretching out below her. 300 chairs. She thought about the faces that had sat in them. The scales and plates and mandibles and skin of a dozen species, all staring up at her while she told them the worst story of her life. She closed her datapad and pressed it against her chest. 4 weeks later, a new semester began. A fresh class of recruits filed into the amphitheater. They were loud and confident and full of themselves. They pushed and joked and claimed the best seats. They talked about their combat scores and their home worlds and how they were going to become the greatest soldiers the Coalition had ever seen. At the front, Domel began his opening address. His voice filled the room like distant thunder. In the very last row, in the very last seat, a quiet girl with a datapad on her lap watched them all with calm, steady eyes. Nobody noticed her. They will.